You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. And I've been looking forward to this BioTalk for many months now because I have a chance to catch up with one of my old friends and someone who embraced me in the early days when I first came to the biohealth capital region in Maryland. And he basically saw something maybe that some others didn't. And the other thing that we have in common is we're both survivors in this economic development world, which is sometimes very fickle. But I've got Tom Sadowski, who's been doing this for over 30 years now. And he's the executive director for the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, known as MEDCO. And Tom, welcome to BioTalk.
Hey, good to be here with you, Rich.
You had practiced some jokes earlier, but I guess you're not going to try it again, huh?
Well,
I'll be your straight man.
Well, the whole embracing you as you came into the community, let's get it straight. I embraced the vision and what you brought to the table. I think as we got to know each other better over time, I'll give you a hug every once in a while. I think you've done great work. I think really what the biohealth capital region is all about is this bigger idea, this eye for the potential and the opportunity that exists, and how do you go after it? And I've always tried to emulate that approach in my 30 plus year career. So you were very welcome at, I guess, first sight, as it were.
Yeah, embracing's good, Tom, and it's reciprocal. I enjoyed the embrace we had and the occasional glass of wine, which we need to take up again. So
right.
One of the things that we do traditionally with BioTalk is that rather than me read from your resume, is let you introduce yourself in those things that you think the listeners would be most interested in your history as to how you got to where you are today. So Tom, take it away.
Well, thank you. You had mentioned I've been in this business over 30 years. I think it's approaching 35 now, but it's one that started early on when I was putting myself through. I was born and raised in the Baltimore area. I should clarify that. Always been a resident of Maryland. Put myself through college at UMBC. The last couple of years of my time at UMBC, I was selling real estate. I really had an interest in the real estate and development side of the equation, but I was on an internship at Baltimore County's Economic Development Corporation and kind of got to see the full spectrum of what not just real estate development, but economic development, what it was all about. And it really inspired me how to improve communities, how to help people find employment, how to create commerce and employment opportunities. It's been a great ride ever since. I think the approach that I've really been accustomed to taking is one that's by way of partnership. And I think you really believe in that as well. Government can't do it all on its own. Industry can't do it all on its own. And certainly education, it has its mission. But together, those combined efforts can really make for transformative work. So my 30 years working at the local level, regional level, and then ultimately with the state, that's really kind of been my approach to things. And I think it's helped tee up a really great opportunity at MEDCO right now, where we get government, industry, and education working collaboratively, doing some pretty unique and special things for the benefit of Maryland and its residents.
Before we jump into MEDCO, you also, it's not that you failed to mention, but you had a little tour in academia working with one of my board members who I respect and admire, Dr. Jay Perman, as the chancellor of the University System of Maryland, and you spent some time with him. So talk a little bit about that, because that also gave you the flavor for working throughout the whole system and throughout the whole state of Maryland.
No doubt. So Dr. Jay Perman, and this isn't just to benefit my friend with his board member, but Jay's like one of the finest human beings you're ever going to want to meet, first of all. So it was really a pleasure to work with him at the university system. Yeah, I had 5 years as vice chancellor of economic development. We started a venture fund, the Maryland Momentum Fund. Many of your listeners may be aware of that program, and had a lot of success getting that started, building it up, scaling it, launching it. I think there's more than close to 30 portfolio companies right now. So that's been terrific. And Jay's vision is very much akin to my interest in the economic development world. I mean, what Jay did as the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore, in building that biopark project in West Baltimore, and really being intentional in how they did it, connecting with the community to make sure that they were competing and getting the jobs that were being created, was really kind of a special approach. So Jay taking on the role as chancellor, I think it was really a gift to work with him in that capacity. We did some great things all across Maryland, helping to grow the research enterprise and really in embracing the support of industry in growing that research enterprise. So already they do so much great work with the federal government and the military installations throughout Maryland. But Jay really embraced this idea of partnership and community investment and development that really was appealing to me and really has helped to shape the direction for where we're taking MEDCO right now.
And so basically, while you were at this system with Dr. Perman, this MEDCO opportunity emerged. And talk a little bit about the transition from the system into MEDCO back into your pure economic development world and what you saw there and what attracted you to MEDCO. And then give us a little bit of the history of MEDCO, bring us up to date to where you are today.
Well, it was really a blessing in that when my predecessor announced his retirement, I noted it, but didn't really think about it until a couple of weeks later. And I thought, wow, everything that we're working on here at the university system, boy, at MEDCO, I really have the opportunity to actually build it, to actually finance construction, develop the infrastructure necessary, help find funders for the workforce development programming that they're trying to inspire. So I really saw the role as executive director at MEDCO as a way to pursue and bring to completion a lot of the work that we were doing at the university system. Maryland is infamous for its robust assets in the area of higher education and federal research and innovation. And MEDCO is an agent that was created back in 1984 to serve as a special purpose real estate development and financing authority. And it's done a lot of creative work over the years, developing infrastructure, garages, Southwest Terminal at BWI Airport, made a lot of improvements down at the Port of Baltimore, a variety of different projects. We're going to have over 10,000 student housing beds in our portfolio by the end of this year. But to go back to the story as it connects with the university system, I really saw all the capabilities that MEDCO possessed as an opportunity to really help leverage the tremendous economic potential that resides in all the federal facilities throughout Maryland and tying in industry to help, again, grow the research enterprise, create strategic places and ecosystems around those institutions where startups can not only be launched, but housed and funded and grow. So MEDCO presented this perfect storm opportunity for me to really go pursue and complete a lot of the work that had inspired me in the 30 years prior.
And then when you talk about 1984, I think also back around, I don't know if it was that time or not, TEDCO was one of the other creations of the state
Right.
as an instrumentality. And I think one of the things that's been progressive about Maryland is the enabling legislation that empowers these freestanding independent organizations to do many different things based under what your empowerment and your funding enables you to do. So I think a lot of the listeners probably don't understand all of the different things that you're empowered to do with MEDCO, and maybe some of the things you plan to do in the future with maybe a new strategic plan that's emerging under your leadership.
We were afforded revenue bond financing powers at our creation back in 1984 and some real estate development capabilities. So we could come in and acquire property, improve it, and make it available for the next tenant to come in. And we could do that with a variety of different means. We could use state grants, federal grants, private sector investment. So we really were an agent for public-private partnerships way back then. Now, over time, the capabilities of MEDCO have evolved. So we've gone from the traditional revenue bond financing and kind of the bread and butter real estate and development work to the ability to create special benefit districts and do tax increment financing and procure expert consulting and advisory services. So not only can we come in after a deal has been conceived or a project been conceived, but we can actually work with local governments, state agencies, with private entities in the conception of projects. We brought in Ernst & Young's infrastructure group to work on a number of state highway and infrastructure projects in the past. We are this conduit to the broader marketplace to help apply the best financial and business-minded solutions for a variety of economic development initiatives. So talked about our strategic plan. For a time, MEDCO just kind of waited for the phone to ring. And a lot of times that came from bond attorneys or investors looking for the cheapest way to finance a real estate project. We also built the Hyatt Resort in Cambridge. So that was a project that normally wouldn't pencil out if not for MEDCO's unique bond financing capabilities. But a lot of times we just waited for the phone to ring. And the board recognized, given the challenges presented by some recessionary forces, the pandemic, the impact the pandemic it had in our economy, and looking for its new executive director, somebody that could be a little more proactive. I had the honor to come on and serve. And one of the first things we did was go about developing a strategic plan. So how can we better utilize all of our legislative capabilities and powers for the maximum benefit to the state? And we came out of that exercise with 4 key areas of focus. And it's targeted industry development, where we work with our partners at the Department of Commerce. We identify where there's real key sectors of strength and opportunity. And let's focus on them. Where are the opportunities for growth, and where can we utilize our powers to help scale up activity in those key sectors? Innovation capacity development. Again, I go back to how do we help realize the tremendous potential that's present in our federal labs and higher ed institutions, our innovation drivers in the state, if you will, working with them in a strategic fashion to open up that potential and really make it go. We also identified the need, as everybody should, to support and help foster inclusive and equitable economic growth opportunities. Governor Moore, his mantra is, we leave no folks behind. So we have to be very intentional, not only about and strategic about the work that we're doing, but who really that work impacts. And particularly when you look at a lot of the federal labs, the higher ed institutions, you look at those communities that surround them. Let's make sure those communities have the best opportunity to benefit from the work that's being done at those institutions. So the residents can work there, can get there, have means of transportation, have the education or the training available to them to pursue those job opportunities. That small businesses, minority business enterprises have an equitable shot at working with those institutions. So working very intentionally in that area. And then finally, the area of strategic placemaking. It just makes too much sense. If you already have the infrastructure and the assets in place in a certain area, why not make the most of those assets and that infrastructure? How do we employ transit-oriented development or sustainable community development practices to help create these places where not only the institution or the installation or the federal lab thrives, but the residents thrive, small businesses thrive. Startup businesses can thrive in those neighborhoods or nearby and still get to those institutions. So, it's all about, I think, working a little bit more smarter and more intentionally with the opportunities that Maryland has. And those are great, tremendous opportunities that we have. So just working better as better partners with the state of Maryland and with the private sector and make all those a reality.
It's also an opportunity to leverage resources rather than duplicate resources too. And when you look at all of those private-public partnerships, you can get a much greater return leveraging each other's strengths and their financial resources than trying to do it all by yourself.
1 + 1 = 5.
You're right. You mentioned the first thing was targeted industries, and you said there's 4 of those. Can you talk about what the 4 are?
I meant the 4 key areas of focus, but...
Oh, the 4 key areas of focus. I thought there were 4 target industries, Tom. I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad to talk about some of the target industries. I mean, obviously, bio and life sciences is a tremendous area of focus for us. Biomanufacturing, prototype manufacturing. We need lab space in the state of Maryland, and of all varieties, for the Fortune 500s and 100s to their early stage startups. So we're working creatively with our friends at the state of Maryland on the creation of, programs and initiatives that helps to foster that. One of the great examples of that, early in the Moore administration's tenure, we worked with his team on formulating the idea behind the Building Our Future pilot grant fund, where we had termed it a fund for investing in innovation infrastructure. And it was a matching grant program. And that's a great way of utilizing state resources to leverage more private sector investment, federal government, and maybe even higher ed institution investment. When we launched that Momentum Fund, the system put $10 million into that fund over 4 years. And I think the metric was for every $1 that the system invested, we got another $6 or $7 in co-investment match. And so we kind of employed that same discipline in looking at this innovation infrastructure fund, where for one state dollar, maybe we could get 5 or 6 in private sector match or federal government assistance. And really, again, using that spirit of partnership in a more strategic way. So looking very much forward to how that program evolves. Cybersecurity, quantum technology, aerospace, hypersonics, those are other core areas of significant opportunity. The green and sustainable blue tech sector is an area of tremendous opportunity. We're working on a number of different projects in all of those sectors and helping make sure the resources are brought to bear.
Thanks for that, Tom, because that insight is extremely good, looking at what your priorities are, because they align with a lot of our priorities in the biohealth industry. And one of the other things, and I don't know how connected you are, but I'm just thinking, Dr. Perman's also the chair of the Life Science Advisory Board for the state of Maryland. And I'm just thinking, why isn't that MEDCO isn't on the board? Maybe we should talk to Jay.
There you go.
Collectively. And I don't know if you want another post, but I'm sure you have many that you have to serve on. But based on the things you're talking about, they align with what the LSAB goals and objectives are. And since you are a potential funding resource for some of those ideas, it would make sense to get your vision incorporated into that.
Well, Jay and I have spoken. He's invited me to a couple of meetings where we've shared some ideas. So we're always welcome to having a seat at the table and assisting. The man's never shy about doing what's needed to make it work.
There's one action item we take away from this. Got to be at least one. But you hit on the biohealth and the life science industry and how important it is to the state of Maryland. And that's how you and I connected originally. When you were at Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore, and I was just beginning with BHI, we actually got engaged with EDA, Economic Development Authority grant, to help do some mapping and understand the assets that we had in the Baltimore area. And that at that time, BHI was only focused really on sort of Montgomery County to Baltimore. We weren't really focused on the whole state. We weren't focused on the region and everything else. So that was really the beginning of your and my interaction and relationship. And our teams worked together on trying to do that mapping of the assets that we had, which were pretty significant, but have grown dramatically in the last 10 years since you and I took on that project. So I think what's really interesting now is you can take that in spades and grow it dramatically rather than just thinking about growing or mapping the Baltimore area. We're talking about mapping all of the assets in the whole state of Maryland, which you can draw upon for your strategic plan in how to grow those assets to a greater level.
It's critical. I mean, if you don't know who your customer is, you don't know how to help them, and you're not listening to them and what their needs are, you can't facilitate their growth. I look back on that as another inspirational time in my career, Rich, with that EDA grant. It was a way to get in resources, not only to do the mapping, the asset and customer mapping, but also, if you recall, we were able to get some resources to launch that digital health accelerator program. We helped to launch a number of new startups through that program, and many of which are still in the Baltimore area. I think that served as great insight into what the potential could be. I know Hopkins has shaped a lot of their efforts as a result of that experience, and UMB as well. But look, it magnifies the issue. You can start these companies, but you can't just get them started and then push them out into the cold, off into the wild. I know that's a lot of what your work entails right now. How do we address the life cycle of those companies? And that's a lot of the work that we're doing now at MEDCO, because we're very real estate and finance centered. So how can we provide the kind of infrastructure that they need to grow, to scale up, to get funded and succeed? So this wet lab challenge is really a significant one. We're looking for ways that we can help to underwrite the cost of development to house that earlier or the later early stage startup to then the next generation, and create those opportunities all along the life cycle so that they don't have to leave to find the kind of space they need to scale up their ideas and improve their technology.
I think that's living with us all right now, because I interact with JLL, Alexandria, CBRE, Boston Properties, all these guys all the time. And if you look at what the transformation the industry is going through in the nation as well as in the state of Maryland right now, it's a little difficult for the emerging companies, especially in the investment climate and the venture world, which you might be seeing, for them to get the funding. And really, the more mature companies might be able to get access to funding, but a lot of that is that they're flat. They're not really getting the valuations that they were getting 2 or 3 years ago. So then the other thing that's happening, and you know it as well, is the commercial real estate space with its 20% vacancy creates challenges. And there is some conversion going over of the office retail space to lab space, which is another dynamic which I think can benefit a lot of these companies that are looking for that early stage and startup space, which is so expensive for these developers to absorb by themselves. So I'm sure in your analysis of this need for wet lab space, all of these factors are playing into that. And what role can a MEDCO, what role can the state, and what role can the private developers play in working together to help solve some of these gaps that we have right now?
Well, it's funny. I mean, you talk about getting an idea to market and getting a company launched, and it's oftentimes a lot of talk about de-risking in various forums. And what we need to do is help to de-risk the provision of the kind of space that's required. So we're trying to work creatively with developers. Again, that was the inspiration behind this Building Our Future Innovation Grant Fund or Innovation Infrastructure Fund. How do we get state resources in to help just buy down the cost a little bit in the provision of the kind of space that's required to help catalyze the kind of development that's necessary or redevelopment necessary? There are a lot of these federal facilities out there, and feds are only looking at maybe a 35-40% return to work ratio in a lot of respects. How can we repurpose some of their space to maybe create collaboration space? You talk about the influence that you brought to the marketplace when you first arrived. There's no better way to go and get that same kind of inspiration or to draw upon the same inspiration by going out and seeing how others have done it. And Georgia Tech is a place that I've visited many a times. And just the simple way that they've financed the construction of some of their facilities was amazing to me. And it appealed to the competitor in me as well, because we lost a key innovation center opportunity with Stanley Black & Decker because Georgia Tech financed construction of one of their buildings with taxable bonds, which meant they could put a private sector entity right across the hall from the engineering department and gain access to not only faculty, but students. That's not how we did it up here in Baltimore and Maryland. We were always using the tax exempt route and going government bond funding route, which precluded that kind of collaborative proximity. And so we set apart that put ourselves out there to do it a little bit differently. Let's get a little more creative. Look at how our competitors have done it. Necessity breeds invention.
It sure does. And I love your fresh thinking. And the other thing is, I never ever thought about incorporating this type of a discussion at our BioForum. And this is going to be our 9th year, September 19th and 20th. And It's going to be at US Pharmacopoeia up in Rockville. It used to be at AstraZeneca. And Unfortunately, COVID, they haven't allowed a lot of big meetings to come back into their space again. But we're going to be live again this time. And this will be the first time in 3 years where it's 100% live rather than hybrid or virtual. And
very good.
I have a second action item here. I'm going to find a way to work into the agenda if you're willing to speak there and talk about some of the vision you have for MEDCO and how it relates to the life science industry.
Outstanding. No, I'd love to do that. Thank you, my friend.
You're on, sir. So let's talk about, you mentioned the governor earlier, and let's talk about the relationship MEDCO and this administration has and how you see you guys are going to work together from a state and an independent MEDCO organization to meet both his goals for the future and your goals for the future.
So to back up a little bit, MEDCO is a quasi-public private entity. So we are not a funded entity of the state government. We exist by the fees and the interest income that we earn from the deals that we're engaged in. They're very nominal, and we do enough to cover our costs and maybe a little bit more. But we do on occasion get capital contributions from the state. We're using some capital grants to build out SCIF facilities, secure compartmentalized information facilities in military communities in Southern Maryland. That's kind of our relationship to state government. The governor appoints the members of our board to a variety of staggered terms. I think that, talk about another tremendous human being, Wes Moore, and his vision for the state. I think he's generated so much energy and so much enthusiasm that I can't wait to talk to him and members of his team about the things that we're doing and how we're organizing ourselves, because that's what we're built for, is to help facilitate their success. Early on, we're talking about a lot of opportunities in the area of cannabis reform and how that industry is going to be cultivated and helped to grow, pardon the pun, in Maryland. We're talking about even the horse racing industry and how we facilitate the best future for the future of horse breeding, training, and racing for the state of Maryland. But, most of all, it's about the residents and business leaders that currently reside here. Last week, I think, as you know, I've been the chair of the board for junior achievement in Central Maryland for the last 4 or 5 years. And we just built a new workforce center in Lansdowne, a community in Baltimore County, southwestern Baltimore County. We service over 40,000 kids every year in the area of financial literacy, workforce readiness, career readiness, and entrepreneurship. And we just had the governor out to tour that facility last week. It was just great. It was great to see the look on his face and know that there are other people out there that care. I'd like to say we care as much as he does about this kind of stuff, but at least to see that there are folks of like minds, that we're not just thinking about that one transaction. We're thinking about the future and the impacts on future generations. I think we're very much aligned with his vision for the state. And we just, every opportunity we can, we try to meet with, I've met with many of his cabinet already to talk about how we are aligned and positioned in such a way to help foster their success, whether it's at the Port of Baltimore, whether it's at the Department of Community and Housing Development, whether it's Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation. There's a lot of collaborative opportunities for us. So I'm just really excited about his administration, the people he's brought onto his team, and the opportunities to work with them and the success that we're going to have in the near and long term.
You talked about inclusion being one of the areas for your focus for the future. And that's one of his primary areas of focus too. So you're definitely aligned there. But as you're doing your strategic plan, and it's a living document, what are the major gaps that you've found in the state in your planning exercise that you feel need to be addressed where you can have an impact on it? And how can partners help you achieve and fill those gaps that you've identified?
So I think the real gaps are in infrastructure development. We broaden that term to include, as we had said, innovation infrastructure, whether it's a SCIF facility or whether it's a wet lab facility. But a lot of these big projects, they require a new road, new water or sewer line. And a lot of the existing infrastructure is crumbling in a lot of areas that are in need of reinvestment or redevelopment. So really an intentional focus on infrastructure has been, I think, I wouldn't say a gap as much as it is an area of significant opportunity.
The glass is half full.
Exactly. Amidst the great challenges that we have exist great opportunities. That's the way we see it. And I think that these infrastructure solutions that we're bringing to the table, maybe it takes the burden off a local jurisdiction or a state agency, or maybe a developer. David Bramble's doing some amazing things in Baltimore City, and we're working with him in a couple of different areas. And our involvement helps take some of the burden off of him from an infrastructure standpoint that he can then apply to the further development of his project. It helps improve the capital stack a little bit and makes the business model, I think, more attainable or better attainable. I think that's an area of real focus for us. And it's just where we're applying ourselves, in urban communities. We're going to be doing a lot of work in the area of the last mile, the digital divide. And, we're looking at broadband infrastructure and how we can help solve those challenges in communities in need. And not just how to provide it, but then how do you teach people how to utilize the technology, right? And utilize that service. The one area that I think is one that I look at, I think we have a pretty solid strategic plan in place that's going to carry us forward at least the next 3 to 5. But there are values that we associate in the execution of that strategic plan. And we'd like to say with our people, that's the way we conduct our business within the organization and outside the organization has to be driven by our core values. And they are equity, integrity, community, and excellence. So in everything that we do, we have to embrace those core values and make sure that whatever we do, we're doing it right. And that we're giving Maryland that opportunity to be seen as a leader in whatever area or whatever initiative that we take on.
For the listeners, we're talking with Tom Sadowski, who's the executive director for the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, MEDCO. And he's bringing the same enthusiasm to this job as every other job I've seen him in the last 12 years that I've been in Maryland. So, Tom, congratulations on your new role. Before we end this edition of BioTalk, is there anything that you wanted to say to the listeners that we have not discussed that you'd want to impart upon them or call upon their help for?
Again, I think it goes back to that discussion we had about the challenges and the gaps that maybe we see on an everyday basis. Don't be deterred. Give us a call at MEDCO. Let's sit down and talk about the solutions. They're out there. It takes a little work. But again, it goes back to that easy equation. 1 + 1 = 5. I think there are a lot of those opportunities out there. And maybe we don't help inspire all of them, but we sure as heck want to be involved in bringing them to fruition, if you will. So the one thing I failed to mention is, in my background, is the fact that I have 5 children. We live on my wife's farm out in northern Harford County, Maryland, have 35 head of beef cattle.
Gentleman farmer.
Yes. Well, I like to say I'm a farmer by marriage and she's Polish by marriage. So that's, I definitely got the better end of the deal. But we're in the nurturing of life business, whether we like it or not. So let's just make it the best we possibly can. That's what I like to bring to the job every day. And it's something I certainly see in you, and the longevity that you've had in this post. I really applaud you for your good work.
Well, thank you. I think you're involved in physical, human, and animal life that you're growing these days, Tom. So congratulations and keep it up. And I look forward to working with you as many years as we continue to stay in this profession. So thanks for being on BioTalk. I have a couple follow-up actions I'm going to follow up with you on. Appreciate your insights, and thank you for your leadership and what you do for the state of Maryland.
Thank you, my friend. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.